Most UFO skeptics say that if beings from other world were really visiting Earth, why don't they simply land on the White House lawn? While E.T. has yet to do the Hollywood treatment, they did the next best thing not once, but twice in 1952. That's right, on the evenings of July 20th and 27th, 1952, numerous UFOs were tracked on radar, seen by eyewitnesses on the ground, and actually chased by fighter planes sent up to intercept them over Washington, D.C. Both incidents were hard for the government to play down once the national press quickly got wind of the fact that UFOs were buzzing the White House and Capitol building. While what became known as the Washington invasions were two of the most highly publicized incidents of the 1950s, even by the end of the 40s the Air Force realized it could no longer sit idly by while hundreds of UFO reports piled up around them. In 1948, they launched the first of a series of official military projects tasked with investigating UFO reports. Called Project Sign, its small staff of field investigators were tasked with gathering information, conducting on-site interviews, and producing an estimate of the situation for their superiors. Their official conclusion was that some of the flying disc phenomenon was caused by, get this, extraterrestrial agencies. You heard me right. The USAF's first official inquiry into unknown aerial phenomenon stated point blank that ET was here. This went over about as well in the Pentagon as a lead B-47. The powers that be were either unwilling to accept the findings or they were more concerned about the ramifications should the report find its way to the press. The Directorate of Intelligence at that time had several divisions that oversaw the ongoing UFO investigation. The collection branch was headed by Colonel Robert Taylor and his right-hand man, Lieutenant Colonel George Garrett. Being privy to the bulk of material and interviews gleaned in the Project Sign investigation, they too were sympathetic to the idea that some of the phenomenon were genuine, technologically superior objects not of this Earth. That wasn't to say that everyone in the Air Force was satisfied with the interpretation of the data. The Air Intelligence Office, headed by Colonel E.H. Porter, reported consistently negative views concerning UFO analysis. Porter and his adjutant, Major Aaron J. Boggs, seemed particularly fond of spinning all reported UFOs as natural phenomena. This divisiveness within the halls of the Pentagon was hardly likely to end well for the investigation. Add to it the decision by Air Force brass to switch from a policy of investigation to one of obfuscation, and it should come as no surprise that Project Sign was terminated in late 1948. Of course, that didn't mean the Air Force was going to discontinue investigating. In February 1949, it started the ironically named Project Grudge. While the newly appointed staff was given the same latitude to collect data as well as interview military personnel who had encountered UFOs, their mandate was quite different than that given to those of Project Sign. The marching orders of Project Grudge wasn't so much to investigate the phenomenon as to debunk it. The project operated on the premise that all UFO reports could be explained as conventional phenomenon. 6 months later, it issued a 600-page technical report, but for the sake of brevity, let me point out that when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And boy, did the report try to put the nail in the UFO coffin. Page 6 of the report sums up the conclusion like this. 1. Evaluations of reports of unidentified flying objects to date demonstrate that these flying objects constitute no direct threat to the national security of the United States. 2. Reports of unidentified flying objects are all the result of A. Misinterpretation of various conventional objects, B. A mild form of mass hysteria or war nerves, C. Individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetrate a hoax or to seek publicity, D. Psychopathological persons. 3. Planned release of unusual aerial objects coupled with the release of related psychological propaganda could cause mass hysteria. Employment of these methods by an enemy would yield similar results. On the very next page, the recommendations are that investigation and study of reports of UFOs be reduced in scope, and that the current collection directives related to UFOs be revised to provide for information clearly indicating realistic technical applications. The last part of the conclusion makes me chuckle, since the Air Force states that only misguided or misled observers, along with hoaxers and loonies, are responsible for all UFO sightings on one hand, only to seek to learn more about the advanced technical capabilities of the hoaxed or fabricated aerial vehicles on the other. I wonder how Air Force pilots who'd seen and photographed UFOs in flight thought about that one. It's hard to tell, since Project Grudge was shut down only 3 months after the report was completed. If the government bureaucrats who were hoping to put a lid on the UFO phenomenon thought that would be the end of it, they were the ones who were sadly misguided. While Air Force interest in the phenomenon was put on the back burner for the next few years, the 1952 Washington invasions brought the matter boiling to the top once more. An excerpt from Wikipedia sums up the incident as follows. At 8:15 p.m. on Saturday, July 26, 1952, a pilot and stewardess on a National Airlines flight into Washington observed some strange lights above their plane. Within minutes, both radar centers at National Airport and the radar at Andrews Air Force Base were tracking more unknown objects. U.S. Air Force Master Sergeant Charles E. Cummings visually observed the objects at Andrews. He later said these lights did not have the characteristics of shooting stars. There were no trails. They traveled faster than any shooting star I've ever seen. Meanwhile, Albert Chop, the press spokesman for Project Blue Book, arrived at National Airport and, for security purposes, denied several reporters' requests to photograph the radar screens. He then joined the radar center personnel. By 9:30 p.m., the radar center was picking up unknown objects in every sector. At times, the objects traveled slowly, while at others they reversed direction and moved across the radar scope at speeds calculated to be up to 7,000 miles per hour. At 11:30 p.m., 2 U.S. Air Force F-94 Starfighter jets from Newcastle Air Force Base in Delaware arrived over Washington. Captain John McHugo, the flight leader, was vectored toward the radar blips, but saw nothing, despite repeated attempts. However, his wingman, Lieutenant William Patterson, did see 4 white glows and chased them. He later said that I tried to make contact with the bogies below 1,000 feet. I was at my maximum speed. I ceased chasing them because I saw no chance of overtaking them. According to Albert Chop, when ground radar control asked Patterson if he saw anything, Patterson replied, I see them now, and they're all around me. What should I do? Nobody answered because we didn't know what to tell him. While it would take more than a couple of paragraphs to sum up the concern that both the CIA and the White House took over these incursions into restricted airspace over President Truman's very head, a documented conversation took place on July 27th between the President, Captain Ruppelt, and Captain James of the Air Force's recently formed Project Blue Book. While a transcript of the conversation is still labeled as classified, it should come as no surprise that several months later, at the behest of the President and the CIA, the Robertson Panel was formed. The panel first met on January 14, 1953. Unlike Projects Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book, which were staffed by military personnel, the Robertson Panel was composed of civilian scientists, including physicists H.P. Robertson, Louis Alvarez, Lloyd Berkner, and Samuel Goldschmidt. Astrophysicist Thornton Lee Page, astronomer J. Allen Hynek, and CIA case officer and missile expert Frederick Durant were also present. While ostensibly assembled to investigate the recent wave of East Coast UFO reports, including the Washington invasion, right from the start it was apparent that the results were already foreordained. During their initial meeting, which lasted some 12 hours, the panel was introduced to what Air Force Captain Ruppelt felt were the best 23 unexplained cases that had been investigated by Project Blue Book. This was out of a total of 2,331 Air Force UFO cases to date. The evidence included 2 16mm movies, one of which was shot by U.S. Navy photographer Chief Warrant Officer Delbert Newhouse. 2 Navy photographic analysts who'd previously examined both films had stated that the objects weren't any known aircraft, bird, balloon, or weather phenomenon. On the second and third day, Captain Ruppelt and Air Force Major Dewey Fournette presented the remainder of the unexplained cases to the panel, along with their opinion that some of the cases investigated by Blue Book were in all likelihood examples of extraterrestrial spacecraft. The remainder of the third day was spent by the panel in discussing the case material they'd been shown and drafting their report. Incredibly, the panel's conclusion was that, and I quote, "there wasn't any evidence that related the object cited to space travelers." Even after Major Fournette, who was an aeronautical engineer and Air Force intelligence officer, eliminated all other possible causes of the sightings, the panel rejected the notion that any of the strange craft were of extraterrestrial origin. Although the panel had only spent a scant 30 hours reviewing material that had been exhaustively researched by the military for over 1,000 man-hours, the panel couldn't or wouldn't accept the same conclusion that the military analysts had arrived at. In an interesting sidebar, after the panel disbanded, astrophysicist J. Allen Hynek will continue to become the government's chief debunker for many years, only to have a sudden change of heart years later. Initially considering the entire field of UFO study to be absurd, he later wrote 5 books related to UFOs and issued a statement at the United Nations that urged the creation of a centralized UFO reporting authority. When the UN failed to take him up on his recommendation, he started his own reporting agency, the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies, which exists to this day. Just because the Robertson Panel had folded its tent after rendering its conclusion, that didn't stop many additional sightings from coming in. By the time Project Blue Book officially ended in 1969, it had amassed a total of 12,618 UFO reports. While many were officially deemed as misidentifications of conventional aircraft, weather phenomenon, reports of then top-secret military craft, or heavenly bodies, more than 6% were still labeled as unexplained. Even though all the reports were archived and many have become available under the Freedom of Information Act, it is curious to note that all the names of the witnesses and military personnel involved with the investigation have been redacted. This includes the sightings that were explained as well as those that to this day are labeled as unexplained. Why would every scrap of information that could be used to verify or investigate sightings be withheld if the Air Force was finished with its investigations? Why, too, is anyone who was in on the official Air Force investigation that espoused the opinion that some of the unexplained sightings were the work of extraterrestrials either harassed or reassigned, while those who felt that UFOs were nonsense were promoted? Why indeed? I'll cover that in next week's video, Beyond Blue Book. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell.